Well, today we're here at on Friday at the ODF Plugfest. I'm here sitting with Mark Taylor, one of the organizers of the ODF Plugfest, and talk a bit about this event and what is happening in the UK. First of all, Mark, tell me a bit about yourself. What are you doing in daily life, and what's your role within the ODF Plugfest?
Right. Okay. So my role in daily life is I'm the chief executive of a company called Sirius. We are the UK's, I believe, first open source system integrator. So we're not the size of some of our larger integrators like a Capgemini or a Capita, but we are dedicated entirely to open source. We've been going for just over a decade. We work primarily in the private sector. I guess our largest UK and in fact international client is the company Specsavers, and we do an increasing amount of work in the public sector as well. My involvement in this event is I get involved in and around politics in the UK at various times. For a number of years I was the founder and president of the Open Source Consortium. I haven't been doing that for a few years, but for the past few years I've been doing advice to various organisations around government, including some political parties, quite a few think tanks, and increasingly organisations like the Cabinet Office here. My involvement in the event is very straightforward. We believe that the time is right for ODF in the UK. We think we're catching up with some of our colleagues in the rest of Europe as well, and we wanted to get involved in this event.
All right, great. So we had some people from the government coming over today, talk about policies and the open standards and open source software policy in the UK. It's very fresh, but could you tell us a bit what's happening here in the UK?
Oh, it's actually quite tricky to catch up with, to keep up with at the moment. The short answer is lots. There's been a fairly slow build. The current UK coalition government, both parties involved in it when they were in opposition were showing increasing interest in open source. They made various pledges in their election manifestos and the coalition government themselves made pledges as well, levelling the playing field for open source, enhanced open standards, all of these sort of things, and that has reached the executive level now as well, primarily run by the Cabinet Office, which is reports to the Minister for the Cabinet Office, Francis Maud, very close to the inner circle in the coalition government, and they're tasked with pushing through reform in the way government does business in all sorts of areas. In the area of IT, they're focusing on open standards and open source. So in the last couple of weeks we've had loads of announcements on the open standards front, loads of announcements on the open source front. There's now a open source system integrators forum, there's a corresponding open source buyers forum, and there have been initiatives driven literally at the prime ministerial level to make changes in the way that the UK government does procurement, does open standards, does open source. And yes, we had the Deputy Government CIO along at the event today, and that was following hot on the heels of yesterday releasing from the Cabinet Office a new open standards policy which recommends, for example, entirely royalty-free in perpetua standards for use in government, which we think is really best of its kind coming from any European government at the moment. So lots.
Lots is going on.
Lots is going on.
Simon Phipps is also here today.
Indeed.
He talked about a subject you also would like to talk about, I understand. It's about procurement and procurement policies.
Yes, indeed.
And how this relates to the wish and desire to use more open standards and open source.
Yes.
Could you say something about that?
If I may, there's two things I'd like to say about that. There are two things coming out of the government. There's two aspects of it. First of all, the problem is that in the UK, similar to many other European countries, the procurement process itself and the procurement rules are one of the inhibitors to wider open source adoption. The government recognises this. They recognised it at the policy level a long time ago. They've recognised it at the executive civil service level and are following policies to implement it. The two prongs they're taking, one is opening up government procurement to small and medium-sized suppliers, and there was a forum for that Slightly less than 2 weeks ago, where the surprise guest at it was David Cameron, the UK Prime Minister, to underline the commitment to it. And the government's target is to put 25% of all procurement, including ICT procurement, through small and medium-sized businesses. And the implementation of rules in order to ensure that, including government departments reporting on what steps precisely they're doing it and the amount of procurement they've got through SMEs, so on and so forth. So that's one side of it. And of course, most open source in the UK, in common with many countries, is provided by smaller, innovative SMEs. The other prong to it is, and that's more recent in the past week, is to require the larger system integrators, literally to require them, to provide open source solutions as part of public procurement. The first ever open source system integrators supplier forum happened this Monday, so earlier in the week. And it assembled the majority, I think there's about 11, 12, 13 of them, of the big SIs, so the Capgeminis, the Capitals, the IBMs, the HPs, the Logicas, so on, at the Cabinet Office, and the message was very, very straightforward. It is, we do want open source, we want you to provide it.
Right.
So really a two-pronged approach.
This this is an open source supplier forum you talk about.
Correct.
All right, and this is open to all. Everybody can join this forum.
No, it was by invite only, and it's specifically for the large system integrators. Right. In the UK, we have a situation where the majority, it's something like 80-85% of all government spending on ICT goes through the same 11 suppliers. So it shows a level of concentration, one of the highest levels of concentration in any Western or European government. And the UK spends a lot of money on IT as well. Estimates vary, but it's in the region of 16, 17, 18 billion pounds every year. 85% of it going through these top suppliers. The government recognises that it's primarily SMEs who are providing open source now, but they purchase primarily through the big suppliers. So the two-pronged approach is because in the medium term, the market needs to be opened up to more players to make it more competitive, reduce costs. In the short term, the reality is most government purchasing goes through the same old faces. So the government are saying, you're not offering us open source, we want you to, we insist. And hence the two prongs.
All right. Well, I came to know you as a real open source advocate, right? And you are very vocal and active on several media. I think that many could feel inspired by what you do. And if I would like to help to make this movement going, to help out, what can I do?
Oh, what a fabulous question. I think there are two answers to that. And in fact, I was alluding to some of these in my talk earlier today. Two things. Number one is get involved. In fact, three things. Why not? Three things. Number one is please do get involved. So listening to it and reading about it is terrific. It's even more potent if you take action on it. Point number two is spend a little research on how to get involved. Governments work in a very, very specific way, and there's very specific structure around them. So there are political parties which get elected as governments. They don't do all of the thinking themselves, they work with think tanks. Yep. And these think tanks are open to people being in contact and providing ideas. Increasingly, governments are going for crowdsourcing, for want of a better word, approach to policies. Get involved in that. Send some emails, fill in some web forms. In the UK, we've had the Public Administration Select Committee asking for evidence around government IT, and I think 60 organisations submitted it. Fortunately, lots of them mentioned open source. In a 302-page document, open source is mentioned 54 times. But look for those sort of things and get involved in them. So that's the second point. And the third point is, in advocacy, learn to speak the language of these people themselves. You and I had to unlearn a lot of my understandings around free software, open source, free software, Libre, whatever your favourite term is, I don't mind. But public sector and organisations don't think in those terms. They don't care that much about the difference between GPL to GPL3 and BSD licenses, they do care about economic benefits, about freedom from vendor lock-in and these kind of things. So point number 3 is learn to speak to people in the terms that they relate to, not the terms we relate to, and that way we make better progress.
Excellent, good advice.
Thank you.
Is there some final words you want to say to the people who are viewing this video?
Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was not too dull. Please get involved, and we're getting there. We're winning.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you for responding to my questions, Mark, and I hope we meet again soon.
I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Nice talking to you again, Fabrice.